The Julio-Claudian era was ushered in by the combined efforts of Julius Caesar and Augustus, two of the most capable, intelligent, and impactful statesmen that Rome ever produced. Yet though the dynasty began on such a high note with arguably Rome's greatest ever emperor reigning for decades and reforging nearly every aspect of Roman life, the success of the first princeps and the radical steps he took to shore up his own power would sow the seeds of the eventual destruction of the house of Caesar. It is a bitter irony that Augustus, a man utterly obsessed with stability and the importance of a seamless succession, would be unable to codify a legal process for naming the next emperor, and was followed by heirs who were all completely unworthy of the throne. All the competent Julio-Claudians seem to have died too young, some perhaps victims of assassination, others simply subject to the fleeting gaze of fortune in a world where early death was common, even for members of the imperial family. Those who actually reigned after Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, were each beset by their own forms of madness and incompetence, with none living up to the lofty legacies of their deified forebears. The dynasty reached its nadir with Nero, an emperor whose character has been attacked for 2,000 years, but who still probably gets off easy, as we will never be able to fully appreciate the debauchery and cruelty of the man who considered himself a great artist, but who wrought nothing upon Rome but death, decline, and depravity. Maligned in every source we possess, it is a testament to Nero's miserable tenure that he could be accused of setting fire to Rome, and the charge would seem believable to so many. Still, there are hints in our sources that Nero was at times popular with elements of the plebeian masses, but they didn't write anything down for posterity, and Nero's bad reputation is a result of the hatred which the senatorial class felt toward the last Julio-Claudian emperor. Nero earned this ire not so much for his sexual antics, some of which seem to have been exaggerated by senatorial historians, but for the deep culture of suspicion and repression among the elite that he fostered as princeps. Nero was paranoid that a conspiracy would unseat him, not without reason, as it would turn out, but by looking under every rock to find enemies and punishing notable figures on flimsy pretexts, Nero only alienated the elite and made his downfall inevitable. Today, the Stoic philosopher Seneca ranks as the most famous victim of Nero's purges. The learned man had once not just been a close advisor, but even Nero's personal tutor. The emperor ordered his death after uncovering the Pisonian conspiracy, a plot that Seneca was probably not involved in. The greatness of the philosopher is contrasted with the unworthiness of the emperor in the accounts of Cassius Dio and Tacitus, as the historians bemoan that the most capable men of Rome, citizens who would have been at the forefront of the Republic had this system not collapsed, were instead dominated by one so base and wicked as Nero. But though Seneca's death was a tragedy, the philosopher was nearly 70, and so his end was not particularly untimely. He had accomplished much already, and the Romans were not likely to benefit too much more from any forthcoming treatises. The same cannot be said for the death of Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo, Rome's most capable general at the time, and a man who had enjoyed a string of success on the Rhine frontier, as well as in encounters with Parthia, both tenacious enemies that had actually gotten the better of the Romans in recent years. Corbulo was a throwback to the stern and rigid morality that defined the early Romans. He seemed to be a man out of time, an exemplar of the virtues that had defined the highly competitive meritocracy of the Roman Republic at its height, but one who had the misfortune to be born into an age where absolute power was determined more by blood than ability. Cassius Dio describes him thus: "He resembled the early Romans in that, besides coming of a brilliant family possessing great strength of body, he was still further gifted with a shrewd intelligence, and he displayed great bravery and great fairness and good faith towards all, both friends and enemies." Not only did Nero's condemnation of Corbulo rob Rome of a brilliant military mind at a time when the empire desperately needed one, but the elimination of the general would set a dangerous precedent in Roman politics that affected how every subsequent emperor reigned. If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support. Corbulo's death stripped away the last veil of power. The already fraying loyalty between a commander and the Roman emperor, which had once been wrapped so tightly in the ancient Roman idea of the honored relationship between client and patron, was stripped away, and the army formally emerged as a double-edged sword for the emperors. They needed it to remain in power, and its continued victories were necessary not just for their propaganda value and the riches acquired through plunder, but because military success provided legitimacy by demonstrating continued divine favor. But though the army had to be successful, no commander could be too successful as to overshadow the princeps himself. The inherent instability of Roman politics during the Principate era is really just the story of this delicate balancing act, and how once it finally became untenable, the entire empire was launched into a prolonged period of civil wars and warlordism. The crisis of the 3rd century, and even the fall of Rome itself, can, in a sense, be traced back to Nero's unjust treatment of Corbulo and the chilling effect this had on all other Roman military commanders. The Republic was long dead by 67, but Corbulo's death signaled the end of the principled and civic-minded Roman general, perhaps the last Republican value still in practice. Corbulo was the Republic's last soldier, and he paid the ultimate price for clinging to the loyalty that had been inculcated in old Romans, but was woefully out of place in an era of debauchery and deception. The superstructure of ideology constructed to uphold the Republic was being erased in favor of new morals and values that aligned with the imperial system. Corbulo must have thought virtue, loyalty, and integrity would protect him, but he could not have been more wrong, and rather than his death ending dissent against Nero, now every provincial commander realized how tenuous their position really was and vowed not to make Corbulo's mistakes. Corbulo was born into an Italian senatorial family, with his father achieving the rank of praetor. He rose to prominence under the reign of Caligula, when the emperor married his half-sister, Milonia Caesonia, serving as consul in 39. While this was always a tremendous honor and indicative of imperial favor, records show that Corbulo was named consul at a time when Caligula was forced to leave Rome to put down a conspiracy against him that emerged on the Rhine frontier. By leaving Corbulo as one of his most prominent representatives in the city of Rome, this decision shows that Caligula had the utmost faith in his loyal ally. It was perhaps this close association with Caligula that caused the highly capable Corbulo's career to stall out in the wake of Caligula's assassination, with the new regime of Claudius potentially suspicious of a holdover from Caligula's court. But after a rebellion by Germanic tribes, Claudius yielded to pragmatism, and in 47 placed Corbulo in charge of the Roman forces in Germania Inferior. There, Corbulo wasted no time enforcing strict discipline among his troops, and began to carry his successful war across the Rhine and into the heartland of Germania. This was tremendous news for Rome, but Claudius came to see the success of Corbulo and his legions as more dangerous to his throne than the Germans themselves, and so recalled Corbulo to prevent the general from winning any more glory. Corbulo's reaction to Claudius, placing his own personal fortunes ahead of the good of the empire, is preserved in Cassius Dio. Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo, while commanding in Germany, concentrated his legions and harassed, among other barbarians, the Caucae, as they were called. While in the midst of the enemy's territory, he was recalled by Claudius, for the emperor, learning of his valor and the discipline of his army, would not permit him to become more powerful. Corbulo, when informed of this, turned back, merely exclaiming, "How happy were those who led our armies in olden times!" By this, he meant that generals of other days had been permitted to exhibit their prowess without danger, whereas he himself had been blocked by the emperor by reason of jealousy. But though Corbulo certainly recognized the foolishness of the emperor's decision, he was loyal and dutifully returned to Rome. He was next called into action by Nero in 58 to lead Roman forces into Armenia to fight the new Parthian-backed regime and bring the client kingdom back into the Roman sphere of influence. This is not a military history channel, so we will pass over the intricacies of Corbulo's strategy and tactics during his 2 campaigns against the Parthians and their Armenian allies, but suffice it to say that Corbulo demonstrated exceptional skills as a commander. However, he was limited by the conventions of Roman politics and his precarious position as a commander with no blood ties to the imperial family. Corbulo's position was further weakened by Nero's appointment of an incompetent general named Paetus, who Tacitus notes, despised the fame acquired by Corbulo, and Paetus, in his own quest for glory, led his troops into disaster and a humiliating surrender. Corbulo had captured Armenia's largest cities, Artaxa and Tigranocerta, while also successfully carrying the war into the Parthian Empire itself. But this progress was undone by Paetus's folly, and in the end, Rome had to settle for a peace that resulted in little tangible differences on the Armenian frontier, and, with the Parthians' preferred claimant, still on the Armenian throne. Corbulo had won every battle on the Rhine and in the east, but each of these wars would remain unresolved, and Rome, for all its might, was not able to decisively settle its myriad issues on either of these troublesome borders. Both failures would return to haunt the empire centuries later as its strength dwindled. It is a remarkable testament to just how far Rome's capabilities had fallen when its most capable general in a generation was unable to win a single war. The old heroes of the Republic, men like Scipio, Pompey, and Caesar, that Corbulo strived so hard to emulate, had all added vast swaths of territory to the Republic, but Corbulo had very little to show for his efforts, despite his success. Rome was certainly still a superpower, and while domestically standards of living were slowly improving and all seemed well under the steady hand of the emperors, Rome was losing its ability to project power abroad. The era of the unconquerable Roman legions was coming to a close, and Rome was beginning to resemble a paper tiger. Though Rome would of course enjoy military success under the empire, it paled in comparison to the dynamism of the Republican era. The slow death of a superpower was already underway. It manifested at the fringes of Roman power, and very few seemed to have noticed. In part, this military decline can be attributed to the end of the Republican system, that, while far from perfect, awarded commands on a much more meritocratic basis than the imperial era, where emperors were loath to delegate too much authority and prestige to anyone outside the direct imperial family. This tradition began with Augustus, but would only accelerate after Nero was himself deposed by rebellions originating in the provinces. Until the collapse of the West, Rome's greatest commanders would all be emperors like Trajan, Aurelian, Diocletian, and Constantine. Perhaps the only possible exception to this was Agricola, who attempted to subdue the Picts of northern Britannia, but like Corbulo, he too was prevented from finishing his job by an emperor who was jealous of what a successful general could mean for his reign. Agricola was recalled by Domitian, and though, unlike Corbulo, he managed to avoid capital punishment, he was prevented from conquering Scotland, something for which I am sure the Scots are eternally grateful. So while the stern and loyal Corbulo personified many of the Roman Republic's core values, we must stress that he was certainly not a political republican. He had no problem with the military monarchy instituted by Augustus, and willingly served 3 unworthy emperors, 2 of which were among the worst rulers the world has ever seen. Under the Republic, the ambition of a man like Corbulo would have been cultivated, inspiring him to do great things for Rome, but the poisonous ideology of monarchy dulls the senses of its subjects, making them complacent. After all, what had Caligula, Claudius, or Nero ever done to demonstrate that they were worthy of absolute power and the reins of state to such a vast empire? Birth alone determined their inheritance, and deep down, Corbulo certainly knew he was more capable. Tiridates, the Armenian king who Corbulo had defeated, but who retained his crown due to Nero's mismanagement of the war, even told Nero to his face that, "You have in Corbulo a good slave." He must have been more puzzled than anyone by Corbulo's continued loyalty to a man as inept as Nero. The fact that there are occasionally competent monarchs does not erase that so many, across all societies, and indeed all history, have proved unfit for the task, but the impact of their mistakes and misdeeds is typically only felt by the common people, those with the least say in how state policy is formed. Corbulo's inability to fully grasp that his republican ideals were outdated is what spelled his end. As Nero alienated the elite and his unfitness for the throne became increasingly clear, a series of conspiracies were hatched to assassinate the unworthy emperor and replace him with a steadier hand. One of these, the so-called Vicinian conspiracy, was organized by Corbulo's son-in-law and sought to place Corbulo on the throne. We do not know if Corbulo had any knowledge of the plot, but all the same, Nero recognized that even if innocent, the popular general would always be a rallying point for any opponents of his regime. He removed Corbulo from his eastern command and summoned the general to meet him in Greece in 67, where he promptly demanded that the military hero take his own life. Loyal to the last, Corbulo fell on his sword. His last word was axios, Greek for I am worthy. The man who replaced Corbulo in the Eastern Command was none other than Vespasian, the warlord who would emerge on top after the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors to start the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian won his victories on the battlefield, but he was also not above utilizing political subterfuge as he mobilized against rival claimants for the throne. He knew that in this new age of Roman politics, the only thing that determined if a man was worthy of the throne was if he had the power to hold it.